Solve the following inequality and write your answer in interval notation. So it's a quadratic, which means I'm going to need to bring everything to one side of the equation and factor. Okay, in order to factor this, I would set up two sets of parentheses, and two things that multiply together to give me 2x squared would be 2x and x. And then two things that multiply to give me 5 would be 1 and 5. And I'm just going to first try 1 and 5 in these positions. So to check, 1 times x would be just an x. 2x times 5 would be 10x. And I think I can make this work if the 5 is negative and the 1 is positive. They would certainly multiply together to give me negative 5. But then this would be positive x and negative 10x, which would certainly also add to negative 9x. So these are the correct factors. Now, students often can get here, but then are confused what to do next. So the issue lies in, since this is a parabola, actually, I'll tell you what, let me graph it on the calculator so we can actually see this particular parabola. So under y equals, I'm going to graph 2x squared minus 9x minus 5. When I graph this, I'm looking for where this function is positive and where it's negative. So we're going to say green is positive, so right there, we're above the x-axis. Right there, we're above the x-axis, so we're positive. On this interval, which would kind of come around down like that or something, it's negative. So along here, on the x-axis, that thing is negative. And along here, this thing is positive. So that's basically what we're looking for. But students get a little bit confused when we try and transfer this into a sign chart. So the sign chart, what it's doing is basically giving us a graph, but only in one dimension rather than in two. So the zeros here are positive 5 and negative 1/2. Now, what's happening is this graph is either entirely positive or entirely negative on this interval. And the same is true for each of these intervals. We just have to figure out what it is. If you have your graph, you can absolutely say, okay, on this interval, the graph is entirely negative. You can see that. You can see where I have shaded in red. And then on these intervals, the graph is entirely positive. So you can see that visually as what I've shaded in green. What students often try to do is something like taking each of the factors and setting them greater than or equal to 0 and solving. You just don't get the correct answers that way, because when you have two numbers that are multiplied together, the way that they are positive or negative depends only on if the original numbers were positive or negative. So negative times a negative is positive. A positive times positive is positive. And negative times a positive is negative. So that's the only thing it's dependent upon. So that's what the sign chart is trying to show us. And like, you could pick a test value. Like if you pick a test value of 0, then if you put 0 into your polynomial, 2 times 0 squared minus 9 times 0 minus 5 results in negative 5. So that number is negative. What that means is it's going to be negative for every single number inside that interval. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, just use the graph along with your sign chart. Regardless of what you do, if we want to answer where this thing is greater than or equal to 0, that's going to happen along here. and along here. So on the interval from negative infinity to negative 1/2 inclusive, and then from 5 to positive infinity.